You're stuck on these nuts now. Managed to fix that by just changing to a different type of nut or screw. These ones are a little bit smaller diameter and they fit over there. Ooh, it's very, very close, but it fits great. So the next thing I have to do is get these lead nut brackets attached to the main sort of bracket, and it's to go in there like this. And obviously I'm going to need to drill a hole here for the rail to come through, because that's where the rail has to go. Kind of forgot about that. Well, I thought about it while I was designing it, but I forgot about it the other day when I was doing this. So need a rather big hole there, and then 4 smaller holes which are going to be a little bit tricky to get in the right place, because it's quite crucial how far away from the rail axis these brackets are. They have to be at just the right distance. So it may not be correct to just push these brackets, push it straight in there and drill it there. But for the time being, I have just drawn some holes on there to do exactly that. So I think I'll just drill those holes out and see what happens, and maybe I might have to move them around a little bit. Hopefully not too much. So that seems to fit in there pretty nicely. All the rods lined up pretty well. It's moving along nice and smooth. It's not attached, of course. That's usually seems to be the case, that as soon as you start attaching it properly, it becomes much less smooth all of a sudden. But for now, there's nothing immediately glaringly obvious that's wrong, except that I do have to file this down a little bit more. So what I need to do now is hold it like that in the position that it's going to be, and make sure I've got the holes, the positions of the holes from the bottom. This is where it becomes quite handy to have these cutouts in the bottom of the plate, because I can look at it from underneath. At least 2 of the holes I can see from here, and when I push this up quite firmly to where it's going to stay, as luck would have it, those little holes, or the little pen marks that I drew inside the holes before, are already perfectly in the right place. Isn't that nice? So it looks like I did cut these bracket pieces quite precisely. I have a couple of these screws in here now, and I'm just test fitting it before I do the other 2. And it feels really, really good. Seems like everything's lining up just perfectly, actually. One thing is kind of annoying is that I seem to have yet again neglected or miscalculated when I made these cutaways. So when I get to this point, I still have to file off more of something or other here, or cut this away a little bit more to let it go all the way to the end. Don't know how I keep making a mess up of that. Alright, so I've done that for both sides now, and I have about half of the screws are tightened up and half of them are not, so just sort of, these ones are obviously not. And if I turn this side, I'm only turning one side screw, but you may be able to see that the whole thing is moving fairly easily. And the reason it can move on that side as well without being turned is because I have not tightened up these grub screws that hold the lead screw into the pillow block. So when I turn that, you can see the whole screw is moving inside the pillow block. But the point is, the movement is fairly easy to do, and it's I'm hoping it's quite square as well. because when I start moving the screw, like now, it only lets this piece move just a few degrees before that side starts coming along with it. See what I mean? So like that, and then to go back, the gantry plate's only moving a little bit each time. So I think it's all lined up fairly nicely, and I'm fairly pleased with how it's going at this point. I'm going to call it a day now. It's getting pretty late. I did have a bit of trouble putting this on. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I got something a little bit crooked, and I kind of pushed the rail through the linear bearing a little bit hard, and one of these little balls inside of it popped out, which is not good, so I should probably replace that one ideally. But I did not notice any difference in feeling when I was moving it around, so more likely than not I'll probably just end up using the one that's in there. I'm getting a little bit sick of taking everything apart and putting it back together after tweaking a tiny little bit. Check this out. These bolts are just sitting in there, and I can get them to fall straight into those holes, and over here they fall straight into those holes. So everything's lining up really good, and I've just taken the lead screws out on each side so that I can start tightening things up for good. So obviously these are not tightened here yet, but everything else is. And it's moving quite smoothly. So everything here is all tightened and it's looking good. I'm just trying out some ways to stop these screws from moving around in here too much. And for the first try, I just filed off one side of this lock nut so that there's enough room for it to fit on beside the main shaft. But there's quite a bit of room for it to move still. I just filed it with a flat file. I'm thinking maybe if I can file it with a rounded file, I might be able to stop it from moving it quite that much. Okay, I've tried it now using a rounded file, and that gives me still quite a bit of movement. More than I would want, but I don't think I can do a whole lot better really. But the point of this lock nut is, I think I might have mentioned before, but it lets me adjust this from the outside, because I won't be able to get a spanner onto this very easily for some of them when it's all assembled. So it lets me just use this one socket head screw from the outside to turn it, and I can make small adjustments and it will stay where I put it, well, within that range. So that's why I'm trying to do this. You have to be quite careful when you put these on, because you can fairly easily get into a state where it just never really sits properly. So I've tightened this one up, and I'm trying to position this one. So you'll see that as I turn it to meet that plate and pop into the little hole, you'll see that as it would naturally sit, there's no hole, or there's almost a hole there, but it's not quite in the right place. And if I try and turn it a little bit more so that that hole comes into the right place like that, it's very stiff, too stiff. So unfortunately can't use that hole. So I'm going to have to back it off to this one. So I'm going to have to use that hole, well, these two holes there. So that gives us unfortunately a little bit of a gap here. Don't like that much, but that's what I'm going to go with for now. Okay, I have my 4 filed lock nuts on this one now, and it's moving nice and smoothly and easily, and doesn't seem to have a whole lot of backlash until I push it quite hard. See how thin these pieces of angle are? If I give it a good push, you know, like this, I can I think I can actually see it moving a little bit. Maybe. And after I do that, I'm pretty sure that the screw gets a little bit easier to turn each time. So it must be losing a little bit of its adjustment here somehow. Still doesn't feel too bad, but I think I might like to try and do something about that. Maybe putting a standoff between here might help, just to sort of make it a little bit more of a full box rather than an open-ended channel like this. Okay, I've got this one on here now, and it's all in the final configuration and everything, so this is how it's going to be from now on. I'm not going to take it off or dismantle it or anything like that. But man, it took about an hour and a half to get that back in there, because when I've started to try and adjust this properly, I've found a problem with the way I've designed this, or the way this has ended up. These brass pieces have a little lip just around the screw part on the inside, and that fits just in there nice and flush like that. And I thought, well, that's quite nice, because it means that the head of the screw coming in from this side is not going to be obstructed by that. But the problem was, as I just showed you before, sometimes when you put the screw in, it wants to sit just like that, which the holes don't line up. So you have to back it off by turning it a little bit, or in the case of the one that I just showed you, we had to back it off by a quarter of a turn to line up the next set of holes like that. And the problem is that this thread is very coarse, so a quarter of a turn is actually 2 millimeters. So what happens is, if you look at it from this side, when you back it off a quarter of a turn, it sits to about here. So that little lip on the front part of the brass, front being left, it slips out of that little pocket that it was sitting in here. So it slips out like that. And it's actually sort of floating a bit like that. So then when you come to tighten up these screws, when you're trying to adjust it and make it nice and snug, I think what the problem was is that it doesn't always slip back into this circular hole like that. It just sort of sits on the side a bit like that maybe, and doesn't go in, so it'll be like this. I think that was the problem was anyway. So just to get around that, what I did was I turned it around so that this longer side is going to be there, and that way when we back it off a bit, it's not going to be going too far astray laterally, and when we come to tighten the screws up again, it will slide in that circular hole quite easily. The problem with that is, though, that these screw heads, they don't fit down alongside there because they're quite fat, so the top of the screw is going to collide there. But it doesn't collide by much, so I just tightened it up really muriari, as we say in Japanese, and that actually had the side effect of becoming sort of a little bit like a lock nut effect, because as this goes in, let me see if I can do one here. Okay, so that's about as far as I can get it easily by hand. And after that, if you use a screwdriver or an Allen key or something, you can still turn it reasonably easy, but it doesn't come out again. So that is actually kind of a nice side effect. So you've got one lock nut sort of effect on here from this edge of this nut, screw rather. See how it's serrated there? And then on the front of it, you can put the lock nut here as well. So there's two things that are stopping it from moving around, which is how I have this one set up. And yes, nice and smooth and easy to turn. The screw's still not secured, so it's able to slide completely. And the reason that it's sliding so smoothly through these bearings without any washers underneath them or anything like that is because I realized that these pillow block things, the bearing inside there just moves around. So I think I've straightened this one up now, but you can just give it a tap on the edge there to make sure that it lines up perfectly the way it's supposed to. So I did buy a few more of these, but I didn't need to. I could have just fixed them by tapping the edge, and then you get them really nice like this. Okay, that's this side done now, and I think it's time to attach this piece for good. Look how nicely it just fits in, eh? Can thread all those screws in with just one hand. Okay, man, what a lot of fussing around. We've been at this for probably 2.5 hours now, and I've finally managed to get every bolt tightened and still have it moving smoothly. And the only thing that's not tightened is the grub screws on the lead screw holding thingy on this side. These ones are tightened. And just moving one motor, I guess you could say. You can see the other side there, the screw is moving in and out of the pillow block. Almost exactly the same as what I'm doing on this side, but it's not exactly the same. You won't be able to see it on video, but the gantry is still moving a tiny little bit, I think. Yeah, there's a tiny little bit noticeable that this side is probably, when I make a movement, it moves probably about 0.5 millimeter less over there than it does here. But that's alright. When the other motor is there, it should be okay. So next I'm going to put these triangle brackets on there like that, and they fit on the front right, and the idea was that I was going to maybe have to put a washer or something in here to space this one out, but as it turns out the gantry is perfectly vertical, like I didn't need to change anything, so that's good. But to line up these holes that I've drilled, I'm going to need quite a bit more space than just one washer to go in there. So what I'm going to do is take these nuts, they're just regular M4 nuts, not nylock nuts or anything, and I'm just going to drill that out so that it doesn't have any thread in it. Actually, I'll try it with the thread in it first, but it might be a bit awkward with thread in there. And I'm going to use that to space this little distance here. Seems to be about the right height. So it's going to be about like that, which is not really ideal because then you don't have this piece flat up against the gantry. You've got it sort of stand off. It's stood off a little bit, which is not great. But I think it should still be strong enough. And this piece here at the bottom, so it's like that, it's quite long and it sticks all the way down because I kind of forgot that I was going to have to be making these cutouts. So I've actually only got 2 of these holes to use. So I'm going to cut that off because once again I found that it's getting in the way of, when it comes all the way up here, it's going to be colliding just a tiny bit with here. So since I'm not using it, I'm just going to cut it off there. Seems like every time I use the hacksaw I think, yay, that was the last time I needed to use the hacksaw. But no, never the last time. Turns out if I use these nuts as is, they're going to be a little bit too wide, and it's pushing the gantry plate back just a fraction of a degree, maybe almost 1 degree, but I'd rather not do that if I can avoid it. So I'm going to just sandpaper this down to be a little bit thinner. Okay, I've got that in there now. I filed those nuts down to about 2.6 millimeters was what seemed to be the required height there. And unfortunately this second screw seemed to, I got it a little bit in the wrong place I think, and I kind of tapped another thread as it went in, and it was really hard to get in, and that's about as far as I could get it in. So I'm just going to leave it there because it's in exactly the right place. It's perfectly square and it's very solid, and has not affected anything as far as the ease of movement of this. Everything seems okay. So it remains to be seen whether my OCD will let me leave this like that, but I should just leave it. It works. Let's leave it. I'm just doing a quick test fit of the gantry section here, and I got a little bit lucky because one of these rail ends is going to have to protrude from the block that it's mounted in, and I think I'll make it the other end so that I can make sure that both of these screws are fully inwards. But in any case, it's kind of lucky that this lower screw was the one that was able to go all the way in, and the one that was got stuck is at the top, because it's not going to be in the way of this rail. Hang on, let me show you. So at the other end, where's my, oh geez, still getting used to this camera. So at the other end, this is going to have to stick out like that. But I think everything is going to fit in, and we're not going to be colliding with anything. Looks good. So that means that I will be drilling out the thread from these other two nuts on the other side so that I don't have that problem with the screw getting stuck again. This side was only 2.9 millimeters, so I didn't need to grind it off to 2.6 like that side. And I'm using this thing to check how square it is, which is, I know this is probably not the best way to do it. I mean, it's pretty cheap, but who cares? That's what I'm going to try for starters. But according to this at least, that is perfectly square there. So that's going to do for now. There's a couple more holes that I need to drill in this spindle plate, because originally my plan only called for having a single one of these to, push against to move it. But when I saw how bendy these were, I decided that it would be better to put two in, and since I did just have enough room, I had to change the size of angle that I used though to make it fit. So this is, I think this is 20 by 25 angle instead of 25 by 25 like I originally planned, but that's alright. So I do need a couple more holes here, and they need to be tappable holes because that's the only way this is going to be able to hold on, because on the opposite side here is going to be the spindle clamp, so they need to be flush with the surface, or they shouldn't be protruding there. And I managed to find a 3.3 millimeter drill bit, which is going to be just right for tapping out to 4 millimeter thread. So hopefully this will be pretty much the last thing I need to drill, I hope. Actually, the spindle clamp has some indentations in the bottom just at the right position, so these threads could protrude a little bit and it wouldn't really matter. I wonder if I designed it like that. It's been so long ago I can't even remember.